Alright, so for this video, I'm going to actually go ahead and deploy my first resource using Bicep. Um, so I think what's best is just go ahead and go over what Bicep is real fast. I do have the official definition here, but really the gist of it is it's just a way to create templates to make infrastructure deployments into Azure quicker. You can deploy them quickly, and you can repeat those deployments quickly by generating templates and managing the inputs that way. It is probably worth noting this isn't the only way to accomplish this, but it is the one that is built into Azure, and unless you have a need to go with something third-party like Terraform, this one should do just fine. The resource I'm going to deploy is actually going to be my Azure Firewall. To save myself some money, I delete the firewall every time I'm done with working on this. Firewall is the only resource, or one of the few resources, that will always charge you, and there's no way to stop it. So the quickest way to just save money is just to delete it and redeploy it. I've been using these CLI commands, but today I'm going to go ahead and try and use Bicep instead. I like using Visual Studio Code just for random programs and templates and PowerShell and all that. So that's what I'll be using here as well. The documentation does walk you through how to install it. Make sure you got your extension installed through the extension tab. You can modify the settings if you need to. And then the only other thing that I had to run into after I installed this is also make sure you have Azure CLI installed as well. And you can do that straight through Visual Studio Code, through the PowerShell terminal to install that. You follow the Bicep instructions or guides that's on Azure, it does have you go through and create a file first. I'm going to go ahead and use the same directory I've been using to create the application. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to go ahead and call it firewall.bicep. Next, the documentation says that the good thing with Visual Studio Code is it does have the tags in it. So we can actually just type in firewall and it will give us options of what to use. I'm using a standard firewall with the basic SKU, so we're not going to do anything crazy, so I'm just going to go ahead and do standard. Now, I don't know if it's because the API is just current, there's no other API or whatnot. The documentation does say that this might need to be changed, but I haven't found anything. I'm going to go ahead and reference back to my CLI a bunch just to make sure I'm getting my names correct. The name here is my SFFW, which is my initials, and the app. For the location, according to the documentation, we also need to set a parameter. So what we'll do here is we'll do parameter. Let's see, the documentation says param location, and then we'll do string. Just to prove to you that I am learning as I'm going, I am going down the wrong rabbit hole here. I'm trying to explain that I'm updating the location to match the resource group, but I need to set the resource group manually because I am utilizing multiple subscriptions and just all sorts of stuff that's wrong. I'm about to explain properly as to what's happening. Just know I'm leaving this in here so you can see as I'm doing this, I am also learning myself. And I encourage you to do the same thing. Keep researching, keep learning. So when we do the deployment, there is a part here that asks for the location. Now the location here is the region that it's going to, but this actually gets defined by specifying the location is going to be the same as the resource group. So what we'll do is we'll do resource group dot location. This will look at the resource group this is going into and use that same resource group at that point. So once I had the resource group location set and the parameters set, I was confused on where the resource group gets pulled from. Just know, in case you are beginning at this like me, the resource group will be defined later when you actually run the deployment. So don't worry about that part right now. So if you're familiar with CLI, you know that you specify each parameter of the resource ID separately. You do dash dash resource group for the resource group, or dash G, dash N for the name, all of that stuff. Well, when you're specifying these things in the Bicep template, you don't do that. In fact, you put in the resource ID. So I didn't know that. So when it's asking for all the ID fields, I actually just put the name of the resource. Make sure if you're following along that you're actually going through and using the full resource ID, which you can pull through CLI or through the properties on each resource, and put those into the ID fields. And then the name fields, obviously that's whatever you want to call it, or what the name is of the resource. And then if you need to specify the value for the IP, which I don't have to do here, but if you had to do that, it would be just called something different. But if it says ID, that's the resource ID. Make sure you put that information in properly. So with the Bicep template looking complete, I got all the IDs updated, I had the SKU set, I had everything done. It was time to go ahead and log in to the Azure portal so I could run the deployment, right? This is where I found out that there is a small issue within Visual Code. For some reason, the pop-ups to authenticate into Azure just weren't popping up. And at first it wanted me to use the tenant. Fine, I'll use the tenant. Still didn't work. Pop-ups didn't come up. After starting to do some Googling and searching, I figured out that with Visual Studio Code, that apparently is just a thing that's known, and the easiest way to circumvent it is to end up just using to still AZ login with the tenant ID, but also use the device ID parameter, so it'll generate an ID for you in Visual Code through the terminal, and you can use it to go ahead and sign into Azure then, and I'll show that here in a second. So here I'm about to run it, and you can see I just added in the dash dash use device code at the end. It runs in, but it's going to generate a code for you. Just use that code. When the window pops, or when you go to the device login page, use that code, sign in, and it works just fine. I don't know why it keeps popping up this terminate batch job thing. I sometimes have to actually go through, cancel that, and then rerun the command. No idea where that's coming from, but this will take care of it for you. So my brain was set on the resource group thing. Don't ask me why. So once I verified that I was in the right account and using the right subscription, I started researching on how to set the resource group correct as well. But you'll find I eventually gave up on that and moved on to actually starting to deploy the file. deploy the deployment, I guess. So this is where things started getting fun. I tried to go ahead and run a deployment. Nice thing is when you run a deployment, you'll get errors. First one said I missed the equal sign, so I put the equal sign up by string equal sign resource group and ran it again. When I ran it again, it said it didn't recognize the resource group parameter. So I had to capitalize the G because apparently things are case sensitive and it doesn't like small stuff. So I added that in there. At which point it seemed everything was okay. The tab turned from red to green and I should have been able to deploy it. But for some reason, the deployment was just stuck. Being the first time, I didn't know if I just had to wait, so I just kind of let it sit there for a good 10 minutes in the same spot that you're seeing right now before I reached out to, in this case, ChatGPT actually, to try and get an idea as to what the problem could be. Through it, I actually found out that you can check the resource group and go to deployments, and you can see what is currently running. I had nothing running. You can also try and run the searches through CLI, but I didn't end up doing that. Since nothing was running in the resource group, there was no point in trying to research anything else. So I just went ahead and canceled the job, and I ran the job as a deployment through CLI directly. If you're at all curious, this here also answers my question about specifying the resource group everything needs to deploy into, because I am specifying it through the deployment run right here. And so when the parameter and all that stuff is going to utilize this resource group to deploy everything into, and of course, that's also where it pulls the region and all that stuff from as well. Here's another small little gotcha for you. You know how I changed the equal sign earlier, or I added the equal sign into my string parameter up there, and then capitalized the G? Well, I never saved the template, but when I tried to deploy it from Visual Studio, it took the template that I had. But then when I tried to deploy it from CLI and reference that file, the changes weren't there, so I had to make sure to save the file. I'm glad I caught that pretty quickly. Otherwise, it would have driven me mad. Now, as the last thing that ended up happening, if you configure a firewall, you have to have a management group that goes along with it. You set up a management subnet in the VNet, you set up a management resource group, and you are required to have that if you're using the basic SKU. Well, I knew that, but I hadn't put that into the template. So when it errors out here in just a few seconds, it's kind of cool. It actually tells you exactly what's wrong, and I just had to go and find the information in the Bicep directory and get that last block added into the template itself. Alright, so now the whole thing was finally running, and the only thing I wanted to do was to check and see if the resource group deployment actually showed it running as well. So once the deployment completed, at that point it was just kind of verifying and checking, was the firewall there, was the policy assigned, did it have the right IP? And then eventually I also made sure that the app worked and everything was successful. I think for the next video what I want to do is actually try and deploy this deployment through maybe like a DevOps pipeline or something. So I hope this helps you guys. It certainly is helping me. And so I'll see you guys next time.